and I've taken offence.
Oh, you should see me with Easter eggs. It's rude, really, to be eating them that young. I should wait.
5 away from 5. Aucklanders are able to have their say on proposed changes to council's dog policy. According to some, taking a dog for a walk is only going to be just a bit harder, with some dog owners angry at a new proposal. So, Auckland Council proposal would set a single rule when dogs are restricted from parks and beaches that would replace 17 different rules that exist across the region, a less ad hoc approach perhaps. So the dog ban would be extended by a month from the Saturday of Labour the weekend to March the 31st during busy hours, but also would extend the current ban from the current 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. to 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. So you've got that. Michelle, what do you think? It's a bit late to walk the dog.
It does seem late to walk a dog. And here's the thing. I've never owned a dog. I have a cat who is a free-range cat and an excellent rat catcher. If you've got a rat problem, give me a call. I'll bring him round. I didn't know that you were restricted when you could take your dog to parks and beaches and let them off a leash. I'm completely unaware of this. So, and 7 o'clock seems quite late at night
doesn't it?
To be taking the dog out. I don't know. I don't, like I say, don't have a dog.
Daylight saving, but then what do you think about this? Bit of late to walk the dog, Andrew, or a bit of a squeeze, or?
Well, I mean, we don't really have this issue on the farm.
What am I thinking? Of course.
Yeah. Well, we don't have a working dog. We've only got a pet golden retriever. That's the girls. But she's got a big lawn. She can wander around. She seems to mainly want to go out for a walk at exactly the same time as I go to bed, so I have to hop out of bed and open the door for her to go outside, much to my frustration every single night. But yeah, she just sort of does her thing and wanders around. She's got a big area to play in. But I think that's the key thing for dogs. They've got to be exercised. They've got to have that room and that ability to have a play. And so, if you sort of... And you can't have them on the leash all the time. They've got to be able to run free. So, they've got to make sure that for those dog lovers out there in Auckland, that they do have places they can take them, they can run around and have fun. Of course, the challenge, becomes that they don't immediately start attacking each other's dogs.
Yes, indeed. I actually ran across a couple in Waterview who the dog, Andrew, couldn't, because of the nature, couldn't be taken off leash. And it was, been to behaviour experts and that type of thing, but it was quite sad. They said it was quite sad for them, because they want to run around.
Yeah, they do. There's nothing more exciting than seeing a dog with big floppy ears with saliva all over them running down the beach. That's summer. That's what it's about.
So you don't have any of these problems with your cat?
No, he's very... He's got a cat door. He's in, he's out, he's in, he's out. And we live on the edge of a bush reserve, so he's quite good at bringing rats in to show us during the evening while we're, during the night when we're asleep. He brings them in, makes this particular cat noise when he's got a rat in his mouth, and we sit up and go, well done, Satchmo, take it outside. And he does that, and then later on he eats the head. I don't know what's going on. They do. It's a thing for cats that they eat the rat's head. Back me up, Andrew.
Yes, and they have to come and show you that they've caught one.
Yes.
Someone says here, try and find breakfast on a Wellington waterfront before 10 a.m. on a Saturday. You will starve. So it's not all pro-Wellington, anti-Auckland in terms of the wharf. And actually, you're quite right. I tried that once and I couldn't find anywhere.
You could nip up Cuba Street and come back to the waterfront later.
There were no baked beans for the little low sausage that I love. Got to have the sausage. Michelle, I called.
Bless you.
Great to have your company.
Lovely.
See you later.
Thank you.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's programme, shock and heartbreak as France's stunning Notre-Dame Cathedral is engulfed in flames. How did the massive fire start, and can this Gothic masterpiece be restored to its former glory? The Health Minister is threatening to sack the Waikato DHB board over ballooning debt and concerns about a lack of leadership. The Foreign Affairs Minister stands by his criticism of the Red Cross's decision to name the Kiwi nurse kidnapped by Islamic State. Should taxpayers be footing the bill to clean up industrial waste? And should the sale of Nazi war relics be banned? Remember, you can watch us live on Facebook, Freeview Channel 50, and we're on Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says the government knows more about the disappearance and possible whereabouts of New Zealander Louisa Arkavi than the Red Cross. Ms Arkavi, a Red Cross nurse, and two of her colleagues were abducted by ISIS forces in Syria in 2013. But news of it was only released yesterday by the ICRC. Mr Peters says he believes the government has a better handle on the situation than the ICRC, which works in the region because it can tap into many international assets.
So we've used the expertise of our own people, other international utilities and assets which I can't name, to try and get to this person and extract them. That's where we've been all this time. It's not us knowing more than the Red Cross. It's us using people who know more than the Red Cross about this side of the business.
Winston Peters says the government still believes the publicity now surrounding Louisa Arkavi is not in her best interests. The National Party has warned that a national interest test could have a chilling effect on large-scale foreign investment. The government has proposed the test as one of several options for improving the scrutiny of business investments above $100 million. It says the test will be applied sparingly and could be used to protect essential infrastructure. National Party MP Amy Adams says the government could be pushing much-needed investment at risk.
If you take something like roading or broadband, if the choice for New Zealand is wait for a New Zealand company to want to come along and fund it, or take some foreign investment with careful controls and regulatory oversight as to how it's operated, I think most New Zealanders would say just build the infrastructure.
Amy Adams. An Otago second-hand store owner is unrepentant about selling Nazi World War II memorabilia. Concerns about such items have been raised following the Christchurch terror attacks last month. But Barry White, who owns Trash Converters in the small town of Palmerston, says the attacks had nothing to do with Germany or Nazism. He says he sells the items because of the interest in them, just as he does with memorabilia relating to other actors in the war.
If we don't sell it, we'll forget. It's all history. I get a few of the old people, especially on Anzac Day, that call in. They haven't got a problem with it.
Barry White says those who have a problem with such items need to grow up. The jury in the trial of a top military attaché has heard a covert camera was bought to catch a thief in the New Zealand Embassy in Washington, D.C. Alfred Harold Keating is on trial in the Auckland District Court, accused of planting a camera in an embassy bathroom in 2017. This afternoon, Tale Ruby, an embassy staffer, said a camera was purchased in 2014 when petty cash in the embassy went missing.
We came up with a plan to get a in-camera and to place it in the petty cash cupboard with the idea that we could possibly catch whoever is holding the money in the act.
Tale Ruby said the thief was never caught and the camera was locked away until it was handed over to police in 2017. The Health Minister has warned he is considering replacing the Waikato District Health Board with a commissioner. David Clark says it's not a step that he's taken lightly, but he is increasingly concerned by the DHB's deteriorating financial position. A $56.1 million deficit is expected this year. Dr Clark says despite the best efforts of the Crown Monitor appointed last August, there has been limited progress. The board has been given 2 weeks to formally respond before a final decision. Large crowds have held prayers and vigils through the night outside the famed Notre-Dame Cathedral in Paris. Fire swept through the 850-year-old church earlier today, gutting the roof and toppling its spire. The blaze is now under control. The medieval building's structure remains intact and many of its prized artefacts have been saved. The BBC's Fergal Keane reports from the scene.
I've seen many people here with tears in their eyes. One elderly resident, Monsieur Jacques Katz, told me 3 of his children had been christened at Notre Dame. War hadn't destroyed this place, he said, but a stupid fire had. Now I can still see smoke. It's nothing like as intense as earlier because firefighters from across Paris have been working to contain the blaze. It's been striking how people have rallied to the farm, and every time a group passes us in the street, everybody stops to applaud and cheer.
Fergal Keane outside Notre Dame. The Central Otago Mayor Tim Cadogan says ratepayers and taxpayers are bearing the cost of getting rid of the waste from stock trucks. The country's more than 30 stock effluent disposal sites are funded by the Transport Agency, territorial authorities and regional councils. Mr Cadogan says it isn't fair for taxpayers and ratepayers to foot the bill to build and maintain the sites. The Otago Regional Council has commissioned a site near Alexandra for about $840,000, with about a quarter of the cost covered by ratepayers. Instead, Mr Cadogan says the industries involved should cover the costs. It's 5:05. The Warriors playmaker Blake Green remains only a 50-50 prospect to start in this weekend's National Rugby League match against North Queensland on Saturday in Auckland. Green was a late withdrawal with a groin injury from the starting lineup in the side's narrow loss to South Sydney last round, as his experience was sorely missed. Coach Stephen Kearney says they expect to make a decision on whether Green will play in the next day or so.
He's moving, better today, and if I'm, honest, I couldn't give you a clear indication today. But what we don't want to do is, wait up until the last minute. I think, the guy that sort of comes in for Greenie, needs to be given, every opportunity to prepare as best he can this week.
Stephen Kearney. Hooker Isaac Luke, who left the field with a head knock, is expected to return to Saturday's game. The 4-test All Blacks hooker Liam Coltman has re-signed with New Zealand Rugby through until the end of 2022 season. The 29-year-old has played 92 Super Rugby games for the Highlanders since his debut in 2013. 3 All Whites and 7 Wellington Phoenix players have been named in the New Zealand squad for next month's Under-20s Men's World Cup in Poland. Goalkeeper Michael Wood, who plays in the Dutch top division, and prominent Phoenix youngsters Sarpreet Singh and Liberato Kakache are all included in the 21-strong squad. That's the news.
Hope. It's possible that this will, as these kind of calls for information have gone out, help to elicit information that brings her home.
Loss.
I could see no possibility whatsoever being rebuilt in the way it was constructed over all those centuries. Absolute tragedy for Paris.
And taking a break.
Really, really excited to go away on holiday. Don't have to worry about work.
Get up and go with Morning Report, 6 to 9 each workday morning.
Then on 9 to noon, David White's daughter was murdered. Now he's travelling the country to raise awareness of domestic violence. And after 10, Asia expert Richard McGregor looks at whether sleeping giant China has woken up. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, isolated showers. Auckland through to North Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Fine weather. South Taranaki and Taihape through to Kapiti. Partly cloudy. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly cloudy, occasional showers mainly about the coast, gradually clearing from the south tomorrow. For Wellington, showers retreating to the eastern hills, then clearing by tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland mainly fine. Areas of cloud or fog morning and evening, and isolated showers about Golden Bay and Buller. For Canterbury and Otago, fine inland apart from areas of cloud or fog morning and evening. Cloudy periods near the coast with isolated showers clearing. Fiordland and Southland, mostly fine. Areas of morning and evening cloud or fog and drizzle about the fields tomorrow. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. It's coming up to 5:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The chair of the beleaguered Waikato DHB says she can no longer assure the health minister she can get the job done. The minister has told the DHB's board he is seriously dissatisfied with its performance and he's considering replacing it with a commissioner. David Clark has cited the District Health Board's deteriorating financial position, with last year's deficit of $37 million expected to balloon out to $56 million in the current financial year. Sally Webb is the chair of the Waikato DHB. I spoke to her just before we came to air, and I asked when she heard the minister was considering sacking the board.
It's not the first indication I personally have had. I have had a previous conversation with the minister about the potential of having commissioners appointed.
And when did you have that conversation?
I've had that conversation when I've met with the minister the last couple of months.
So do you want a commissioner?
What I want is strong, focused governance for Waikato District Health Board. And for some reason, one reason or another, as a board, we have not been able to fulfil our obligations in that role.
That sounds like, yes, you do want a commissioner.
I think that will be up to the board. As you know, the Minister has sent a letter to the board, and we have until the 3rd of May to reply to that. As a board, we haven't talked about that letter yet. So
but I'm asking you as the chair, have you recommended to the Minister that a commissioner is what you believe would be the best course of action in this case?
I've talked to the board about to the Minister about the advantages of having a commissioner, yes. And personally, I believe the appointment of a commissioner is the right move to ensure that Waikato District Health Board has the trusted, focused leadership it needs to address the challenges it faces.
Why can't the board get it together?
If I knew the answer to that, we probably wouldn't be in this position.
So let me put it another way then. What is the dysfunction that you are seeing?
There are a number of issues that the Minister has outlined in his letter that the board has been unable to address sufficiently.
What
one
specifically?
One of the most important, well, if I can talk of one specifically, but I'm not going to go into a lot of detail until the board has had a chance to talk about the Minister's letter. But one of the most important roles for a board is the appointment of the chief executive. And as a board, we had to halt that process earlier this year when we were unable to appoint a suitable candidate. So, you know, that's one of our most important roles.
So why have you been unable to appoint an appropriate chief executive? What's the stumbling block?
Candidates actually wanting to apply.
So what do you mean by that? Have some of them pulled out?
Look, that was a process that happened back in February. Lessa and a candidate withdrew, yes.
Why?
Sorry, why?
Why did the candidate withdraw?
I'm not going to discuss that sort of thing in public. That's the candidate's prerogative to do that.
The Minister has talked about his increasing concern over the DHB's deteriorating financial position, right? So your deficit, reported deficit 2017-2018, 37 odd million. 2018-2019, it is 56.1 million. Where is all the money going?
Well, the money is going on the provision of services. And, you know, we're not the only DHB that is in financial difficulties. But what we need in Waikato District Health Board is actual focused governance that can support management to implement a plan to make the organisation sustainable. We've been doing some work on it. Please don't think this board hasn't been doing any work. We have been having work around our financial sustainability and doing some significant work there. But we need to actually have that carried out further and implemented more.
Well, let's be clear about this. Is any of this misstep spending, or is it just the cost of providing healthcare, or have you got inefficiencies? That is a significant deficit track. What is the primary reason for it?
There is no, I mean, it's not a simplistic answer to say there's a primary reason for it. It is about the cost of providing services. It's about looking at patient flow through the hospital. It's about looking at how we relate with primary care and move services into the community. There's a wide range of issues that underpin financial performance. There's no simple way to describe it.
And people will understand that. And you say that you're not the only DHB with financial issues, but you are the only DHB that we are currently aware of that the Minister is thinking about putting a commissioner in. So something serious is going wrong there. Governance and leadership. You say you need focused governance. What is the problem with governance in the board at the moment? I
think you will be aware that this board has had a lot of public disagreement, which has been present about a number of issues for the term of at least this board, and that undermines trust and confidence in the board.
So is that personality issues or a difference of opinion on direction for the DHB?
There's no difference of opinion on direction, and I'm really not going to get into individual issues because, as I've said, the board actually as a group hasn't had the time to discuss this.
Okay, so let's return to the CEO. So how long's it been that you have been without a permanent CEO?
It's got to be over 18 months.
Right. How can you get ahead as a DHB without someone in that role permanently?
Well, we have had an extremely good interim CEO in the position, but that is one of the issues. We need the appointment of a permanent CE.
And he's leaving. Why is that?
I'm not going to discuss that.
Are people withdrawing their applications and others don't want to stay on? Is that directly...
We're not in the process of appointing a CE at the moment. We withdrew...
Yeah, so you've suspended... Yep, you've suspended the search. So why? Why have you suspended the search when this position is critical to the advancement of the DHB, to getting things back on track?
I think that is... the board has been considering, at its last meeting, it considered what it could do about the appointment of a chief executive. So we are looking at how we do the process.
But that doesn't explain why you suspended the process. Why did you suspend the process?
That was all fully discussed at the time, Lisa, and I don't see any sense today in dragging that all up again.
But these are all contributing factors, aren't they, to why the Minister would be looking to bring in a Commissioner?
There are a number of contributing factors, and I don't think it would be any surprise to anyone that Waikato District Health Board has been a board under stress for a while.
So you said that you are basically recommending to the Minister that a Commissioner could be a useful way to go. Is there nothing more the board can do?
I didn't say that. I said I had discussed the possibility with the Minister.
Right.
So I think it's really important that the board has the opportunity to respond fully to the Minister's letter, and that in that response we will then outline the way forward.
That's the whole board. I'm talking about you as the chair and your personal preferences. Is there nothing more that you can do in the role that you are in? It's game over for you, is it?
I believe that it's my role as chair to be able to assure the Minister that I can provide focused leadership for the organisation. And I've been unable to do that. So yes, I guess we would call it game over.
So if we extrapolate that out then, Sally, that means that you need a Commissioner, and in your view, you need a Commissioner because you are no longer able to offer that confidence to him.
Yes, I wouldn't disagree with that. I no longer have my confidence in my ability to give the Minister cohesive leadership.
Sally, what assurances can you give the public that this DHB is delivering them quality health services and care, given everything that you have said to me today?
I can give them very strong assurances in that. I mean, Waikato District Health Board has really committed health professionals in it. We have been doing some, if you look at the good news stories that do get out there occasionally, there's some really focused, stunning work going on, and people are receiving services every day.
Well, let's go now to Paris, where if you're watching, we can take some pictures of the famous Notre-Dame Cathedral. If you're watching, you'll see that there are firefighters still on this world-famous building, hosing down the damp spots. The cathedral there is covered with scaffold because it was actually under renovation when it caught fire. Some of the treasures and objects had been removed for that renovation. Up to 400 firefighters were battling that fire at its peak. And there were extraordinary pictures of Parisians and others standing around watching that cathedral, Notre-Dame Cathedral, burning, watching silently, some of them crying. It is indeed one of the world's most recognisable buildings. It's withstood war and the French Revolution, but today Paris's landmark Notre-Dame Cathedral was ravaged by fire. Notre-Dame is one of the most famous of the Gothic cathedrals of the Middle Ages and is distinguished for its size, antiquity and architectural features. Now, the blaze gutted the roof of the medieval church, toppling its spire, but the two square towers have been saved. The first photos from inside show that the altar and the main stone structure are relatively untouched. Some precious artefacts and paintings have been destroyed, but others, such as the crown of thorns, which Catholics believe was worn by Jesus on the cross, has escaped untouched. And the French President Emmanuel Macron is vowing that Notre Dame will be rebuilt. The BBC's Lucy Williamson has this report.
It was, said the President, a part of France that burned today. A part that stood here for 800 years through war, revolution and religious unrest. Engulfed within an hour by flames. Its ancient towers, beacons for both residents and tourists, crumbling into the blaze. As its current guardian watched through tears.
This is a national disaster. I'm very upset. This cathedral is 850 years old, and to see the building fall to pieces, the spire fall down, just as we were renovating it, all I can do is pray.
Firefighters circled the cathedral to tackle the blaze, their cranes stretching to reach its soaring roof. A complicated and fragile operation. Simply dousing the medieval structure with water was not an option, rescue experts said, because the building could collapse. To tackle the flames inside the building, firefighters had to climb up the towers. Nothing else could reach. President Macron arriving at the cathedral with France's Prime Minister, his face upturned in disbelief.
Ce qui s'est passé ce soir à Paris et dans cette cathédrale Notre-Dame.
What's happened tonight in Paris and Notre-Dame is a terrible event. I want to first thank the firefighters, 500 of whom have battled the flames for several hours, and will keep doing so for several more, and maybe for several days.
The damage is just beginning to reveal itself. The destruction of this medieval symbol of Paris has left the city under a pall of shock and smoke. People packed into the streets around barely spoke, just watched. Those who found the words for their impressions, one after the other, all said the same.
This is awful. It's terribly sad. It's terrifying. The fire is uncontrollable. I've been here for 1 hour and there's nothing we can do.
The Deputy Mayor of Paris confirmed the fire had started on the roof and quickly spread. The cause isn't clear. Police have begun an investigation. But some have questioned whether extensive renovation work currently underway here might have sparked this massive blaze. The task now is to assess the destruction inside the building. Its woodwork dating from the 13th century. Its statues destroyed once before by revolutionaries 2 centuries ago. Many things are said to be irreplaceable. Great art, cultural heritage, symbols of protection and hope.
And that was Lucy Williamson reporting from Paris there. It is 24 minutes after 5. And you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. If you'd like to send us your feedback on anything you've heard on the program so far, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters has doubled down on his criticism of the International Red Cross over its decision to publicise the kidnapping of Louisa Akavi, the Red Cross nurse, and two of her colleagues were abducted by ISIS forces in Syria in 2013. But news of it was only released yesterday by the ICRC. Mr Peters says the government still believes no publicity would be in Ms Akavi's best interests and described any suggestion otherwise as balderdash. Here's our reporter Andrew McRae.
Winston Peters says the government's always maintained its position on the disappearance of Louisa Akavi and has never given up hope of finding her. He says New Zealand has been doing all it can to locate her behind the scenes.
Across the political divide, we've all shared the same view that a humanitarian effort of her kind deserves a response from a country, and I'm proud of that.
Mr Peters says he believes the government has a better picture about the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Louisa Akavi. He says even though the International Red Cross works in the region, the government can tap into a number of international assets.
So we've used the expertise of our own people, other international utilities and assets which I can't name, to try and get to this person and extract them. That's where we've been all this time. It's not us knowing more than the Red Cross, it's us using people who know more than the Red Cross about this side of the business.
Mr Peters praised the work of the Red Cross in general, but didn't resile from his view of the claim made by the ICRC's Director of Operations, Dominic Stillhart, that the government supported the move to release the information.
What I said was that the message that was being carried is balderdash. That's a very polite way of describing how one person has, in my view, dropped the ball, so to speak. Not the whole organisation and not the wider international purpose that's been engaged here. But I don't want to condemn a highly worthy international humanitarian organisation.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says while the government knew of the Red Cross plans to go public, it in no way endorsed the decision.
It should not undermine what has been years of coordination and collaboration and good work between us. And it won't change our relationship. It just happens to be that we've taken different perspectives at this point.
An international law professor from Waikato University, Alexander Gillespie, says the Red Cross may have had no option but to publicly appeal for information on the whereabouts of Louisa.
The Red Cross is neutral, it's impartial, and it works behind closed doors. They only go public when there's no other option. So I think right now, in their opinion, and you must remember that she's more of a Red Cross person than a New Zealand person in terms of importance over there, this is their last option to try to find her.
ABC journalist Dylan Welsh has visited a refugee camp in Syria, which now houses ISIS fighters and about 72,000 families. He says the camp holds about 11,000 foreigners, and if Louisa Akavi is there or in any other camp, she'll be hard to find.
My view would be that it's going to be dependent on whether Louisa herself comes forward and identifies herself if she is in one of these camps. If that doesn't happen, it's going to be very hard for people to find her.
A spokesperson for the ICRC, Pavel Krysiek, says they felt the time was right to go public as working behind the scenes wasn't succeeding.
We appealed really publicly about the more information, and now we also wanted to publicly honour and acknowledge the hardship and suffering of our colleagues.
The Red Cross in New Zealand says there's no new information on Louisa Akavi's whereabouts. It says it's continuing to focus on supporting her family. For Checkpoint, call Andrew McRae-Tene.
The sale of Nazi memorabilia has always been a contentious topic, but in the wake of the Christchurch terror attacks, there are calls for the government to ban the sale of all such memorabilia. Online auction sites like Trade Me already refuse to allow the items to be sold on its website, but as our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown found, one unrepentant retailer in the small town of Palmerston believes that's nonsense. He filed this report.
Oh, it's just that people seem to want, yeah. As I say, it started small and just got bigger and bigger.
That's Barry White, the owner of Trash Converters, a second-hand store in Palmerston, explaining the rationale behind selling Nazi memorabilia. He says he stocks all sorts of World War II memorabilia, and he doesn't think his Nazi items are any more prominent than those of other actors in the war. But an Otago man who only wants to be identified as James disagrees. During a recent trip through the town, he went to the shop and was shocked by what confronted him.
I initially saw sort of a couple of swastikas and was like, oh, that's kind of weird. But then when I stood back, I realised that the sort of whole cabinet was just full of swastikas. It was a little bit more than just I'm just selling swastikas. It had that element of shrine.
James says he's not easily shocked, but he found the display disturbing. However, Barry White says James needs to grow up, though he concedes it's not the first time issues have been raised about some of his products.
Oh, I've had a few people say, it's yeah, so well, think about it. Stalin killed more people than Hitler, so what are you on about? No, go back and think about it. Oh, never thought of it that way.
Checkpoint asked Mr White if the Christchurch terror attacks and the arrest of the accused gunman have altered his views on whether such memorabilia is appropriate.
That was nothing to do with Germany or Nazis at all. That was just some dopey flippin' Australian.
Barry White says war veterans aren't concerned by the memorabilia.
If we don't sell it, we'll forget. It's all history. I get a few of the old people, especially on Anzac Day, that call in. They haven't got a problem with it.
Dunedin RSA's president, Lox Callis, a Vietnam War vet who retired last year from the police after serving for more than 4 decades, says there's no place in society for neo-Nazis or Nazi sympathisers.
I think the line has to be drawn, and I think there's a place for genuine collectors, but there's no place for those people that want to replicate what it stood for. To wear that brazenly, I think is a sort of a kick in the teeth for the men that went and served.
Lox Callis says the terror attacks have started a conversation about what is and isn't appropriate, and that can only be a good thing. But Trade Me has already drawn a line in the sand and banned a wide array of items including Nazi uniforms, weapons and medals, or anything owned by Nazi leaders ranging from Hitler to Heydrich. Trade Me's head of trust and safety, George Heatakis, says the company has held that stance for a number of years and is proud of it.
It's a stance that we feel reflects us, and it's a stance that we feel our member community would be happily to be alongside with. The reality for us is, even before Christchurch, Trade Me had quite a firm position that we don't allow any hateful or intolerant ideologies to be promoted, or we don't actually want to be part of anything like that.
Such items are banned from sale in many parts of the world, including Germany and France. International Muslim Association of New Zealand President, Tahir Nawaz, thinks the government here should look at taking similar action.
I think it's a good initiative from the Trade Me, and I think we should keep our standards high in terms of New Zealand, and I think government should seriously consider to ban in all the other shops as well selling this sort of items.
Trade Me is currently reviewing its standards, as it does annually, and says further changes are possible in light of last month's terror attacks. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Timothy Brown tēnei.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, what the jury heard about why our embassy in Washington DC bought a secret camera. And more changes loom for the Overseas Investment Act. We would love your feedback. Do flick us a text 2101, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. And if you want to let us know what's on your mind, you can also email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time now, though, for the headlines with Susana.
The chair of the troubled Waikato District Health Board says she is no longer able to assure the health minister she can do the job. David Clark has told the DHB he is seriously dissatisfied with its performance and is considering replacing it with a commissioner. Mr Clark says the board's financial position is deteriorating and the 2018 deficit of $37 million is expected to reach $56 million this financial year. The DHB chair, Sally Webb, says a commissioner is the best way forward. The Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters says the government has a better handle on the situation of missing New Zealand nurse Louisa Arkavi than the Red Cross because it can tap into various global organisations. Ms Arkavi and 2 colleagues were abducted by IS forces in Syria in 2013, but news of their capture was released only yesterday by the International Committee of the Red Cross, which says it did so due to the collapse of Islamic State. Winston Peters says the government still believes the publicity now surrounding Ms Arkavi is not in her best interests. The owner of a second-hand store in the Otago town of Palmerston is unrepentant about selling Nazi memorabilia from the Second World War. Concerns about such items have been raised following the Christchurch terror attacks last month, but Barry White says his shop, Trash Converters, sells the items because of the interest in them. He says the mosque massacre had nothing to do with Germany or Nazism. The Central Otago Mayor Tim Cadogan says ratepayers and taxpayers shouldn't have to bear the cost of getting rid of the waste from stock trucks. There are more than 30 stock effluent disposal sites around the country funded by the Transport Agency, territorial authorities and regional councils. Mr Cadogan says it isn't fair for taxpayers and ratepayers to foot the bill to build and maintain the sites. The Otago Regional Council has commissioned a site near Alexandra for about $840,000, with about a quarter of the cost covered by ratepayers. Instead, Mr Cadogan says the industries involved should cover the costs. Those are our headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Let's go to business now with Madison Reedy. Hi, Maddie.
Hello.
Fast food operators, restaurant brands. So which ones, well, can we say bringing home the bacon for them?
We could say that. We could say bringing home the bacon. I quite like that. Now, a word of caution, this story may make anyone driving home from work this evening a little bit hungry, because it certainly makes me hungry. So Restaurant Brands owns KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pizza Hut, Carl's Jr. and Taco Bell, which isn't here yet, but they have announced that it is set to launch here at some stage. Now, its financial year net profit was up just 0.8%. Now, we call that a flat profit. Now, that profit was $35.7 million, and its revenue, so its sales were up 8% to $825 million. Now, that's a lot of fried chicken or bacon. Now, its three key businesses performed pretty well. So that's KFC in New Zealand, KFC in Australia, and Taco Bell in Hawaii. But it was a bit of a different story for its other brands here. So Pizza Hut in New Zealand, its sales were down just 0.2%. But Carl's Jr. in New Zealand, those sales were down 8.8%. It also sold off its license to operate Starbucks over the period. Now, its underlying profit was down about 37.5% too, so hence why they probably sold it there. But all of this hasn't actually deferred international buyers, because as we know, the Mexican-based private equity firm Finaccess Capital has just bought 75% of Restaurant Brands for $1.2 billion.
So while you're saying it's flat, and obviously there's been some decreases in the pizza, so it is the fried chicken and Burger King which are, well, bolstering their returns then.
Not Burger King, they don't own Burger King.
No, sorry,
Carl's Jr.
Carl's Jr.
So
yeah.
burgers and fried chicken are pretty lucrative, so this is.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move on to a little bit of research, which I find really interesting.
It is very interesting.
They've made a list of industries basically that they think are going to be, well, the best performers and the ones that they think are set to flop over the next year, is it, Maddie?
For next financial year. So this is the research firm called Ibis World, based in Australia, not related to the Ibis hotel chain as we discussed earlier. So they've created a table of those set to fly and those set to flop. Now, they base that analysis on the current industries which are doing well and doing poorly, and also based on the trends that are set to affect those industries. What they found at the top of the table, those set to fly, was beekeeping, interestingly. So they expect the revenue in beekeeping to grow 8.1% next financial year. Now, they base that conclusion off the fact that consumers are becoming more health conscious these days, and also because demand for manuka honey is growing exponentially, particularly in China. Now, close behind that was vehicle parts retailers. Now, they based that off the fact that a lot of cars in New Zealand are imported and are second-hand. So it's a pretty steady business to be in the business of fixing those cars when they break down.
Keeping them on the roads. Yeah,
exactly. Also close behind that was video filming services. So more businesses these days are looking to market themselves through video, as we are tonight on Checkpoint. So that's also expected to grow.
Online product, I imagine.
Exactly, and with social media too, that certainly boosted it. And interestingly, personal welfare services, so things like debt counselling and budgeting services, are expected to grow, which is a little bit sad, really, because that speaks to the financial stress that New Zealanders are feeling at the moment. Now, on the negative side of this table, the bottom of the heap was electricity generators. And this is a bit of an iffy one, because they expect their revenue to fall by 10.5% next financial year. But we must note that power generators are coming off a really large peak. So last year, they saw unprecedented rises in the price of wholesale power. So they're going to fall, their revenue is going to normalise and come back down to earth and normalise. So they're falling from a very high point there. Also behind them was newspaper publishing. As we know that story very well, they expect the revenue in that business to fall by 9.5% next year. So not too good for stuff in NZME, they mentioned in their commentary. Also advertising and furniture retailing not expected to do so well.
Why is that? Because that's interesting, because when you talk about consumer confidence, you've often said that people are still buying big ticket items like fridges, etc. I would consider furniture to be among those things.
It is. Furniture is absolutely considered in big ticket items. Things like couches and also whiteware are among that list. But when you look at the likes of Kmart and IKEA also announcing its launch in New Zealand to come soon, consumers are seemingly looking at lower price points. So one would look into the detail of this and think that those furniture retailers, more like your Freedoms and things that have that higher price point, they are probably the ones that are set to struggle as these lower price point retailers come into action.
Shop around for a bargain. OK, what else has been happening on the markets?
The NZX Top 50 index rose tonight about 2/3%, so that's 62 points to close at 9,908. The New Zealand dollar is buying at 67.6 US cents, 94.6 to the Australian and 51.6 British pence.
We're still wafting around those same numbers, aren't we?
We always are.
All right, thanks, Maddie. That's Madison Reedy with Business News. The jury in the trial of a top New Zealand military attaché has heard a secret camera was purchased to catch a petty cash thief in the New Zealand Embassy in Washington, D.C. Alfred Harold Keating is on trial in the Auckland District Court, accused of planting a motion-activated camera in an embassy bathroom. Our reporter, Annika Smith, is covering the trial and filed this report.
On July 27, 2017, a secret camera was found on the floor of a unisex bathroom in New Zealand's US Embassy. It had been discreetly positioned in a heater in front of the toilet before falling from its post. Mr. Keating is accused of planting it, a claim he has categorically denied. Today, the court heard that roughly 3 years before this device was found, the embassy itself purchased a covert camera when petty cash went missing. Tale Ruby, the embassy's Defence Force business manager, told the court she was approached by a staffer about the missing cash in 2014.
We came up with a plan to get a in-camera and to place it in the petty cash cupboard with the idea that we could possibly catch whoever is holding the money in the act.
Ms. Ruby said she tasked Mike Waller, Mr. Keating's driver, with the mission to find a camera suitable for such an operation. The former police officer settled on a brickhouse security camera, similar to the one found in the bathroom 3 years later. The court heard the camera was placed in the petty cash drawer for several months, but the mission proved futile, and it was soon retired to a locked drawer in Mr. Waller's office. Ms. Ruby said she immediately went to see Mike Waller when she was briefed that a covert device had been found in a bathroom.
I said to Mike, hey, what happened to that camera that we had? And he produced it to me. So he gave me the camera. It still was in his locked drawer.
Did you see him do that? You see him take it out of his locked drawer?
Yeah, I stood by his desk and I was like, Mike, what happened to that camera that we had? And he said, oh, it's still in my drawer. And he took it out and he gave it to me.
Ms. Ruby said she'd told Mr. Keating, then head of defence, about the covert camera operation when he took up his post in Washington, D.C. But when she went to ask him if she should tell investigators about the petty cash camera, she said he denied knowing anything about it.
When I went and saw him in 2017, my start of the conversation was, hey, remember how we got that camera for the petty cash? And he was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, oh, I thought I briefed you after Graham, the previous left. And he said, no, I don't know anything about it.
This afternoon, Mr. Keating's lawyer, Ron Mansfield, accused Mr. Waller of planting the camera in the bathroom.
So what you did was go from the Defence Procurement Office round the back and into the disabled toilet. You placed the camera in the cradle.
Absolutely not.
Both Crown and Defence are expected to make their closing statements tomorrow. At the Auckland District Court, this is Annika Smith.
The government is considering a national interest test for screening major investments by foreign companies. It says it needs the power to stop purchases that might harm public health and safety or put essential infrastructure into foreign ownership. The proposal is part of a second round of changes to the Overseas Investment Act, following last year's ban on foreigners buying existing residential property. Here's our political reporter, John Gerritsen.
Overseas investments are screened if they involve sensitive land or businesses worth more than $100 million.
The Associate Minister of Finance, David Parker, says business investments can only be rejected if the purchaser can't prove its financial capability or good character.
Beyond that, there is no discretion to turn down a large investment. We think that we should consider whether we have a more general discretion. It actually relates to something when we were last in government, and we turned down the application by the Canadian Pension Fund to purchase Auckland Airport. We couldn't do that under the large business criteria. We actually had to do it as land more than 5 hectares, which was absurd.
Mr Parker says a national interest test is most likely to be used on things like monopolies on essential infrastructure, such as power lines companies.
We think that in respect of infrastructure assets, which are important to the functioning of the wider economy, they're not just a business unit in their own right, they're key to the operation of the wider economy, that there needs to be a discretion for the government in respect of some of those infrastructure assets with monopoly characteristics to say, no, we don't think it's New Zealand's interest to sell that asset overseas.
Mr Parker says a broad national interest test would be used only sparingly. But an economist for Business New Zealand, John Pask, says infrastructure companies like airports don't need to be protected from foreign ownership.
They're essentially providing a good a service, and whether it's foreign owned or domestic owned, they've still got to abide by the same rules and regulations, so it's not really problematic in the sense whether it's, foreign owned or domestic owned.
Mr Pask says New Zealand needs foreign investment, and he warns that a ministerial power of veto based on a poorly defined national interest test will deter potential investors.
Things like this can actually have a sort of chilling effect on the whole foreign investment regime. So unless there's a significant problem, I think we've got to be careful about putting rules in place that may actually make things more difficult for foreigners to enter New Zealand, as it were.
Mark Foreman from the law firm Minter Allison Rudd Watts says there's already an extra layer of scrutiny for strategic assets.
What they're trying to do is to toughen that up and to make it a bit more binding. That is probably a sensible approach and probably more similar to what they have in Australia. If they are going to do that, they need to be very careful as to how and when that test applies. So perhaps limiting it to assets such as the airport or certain ports or telecommunication networks, etc.
The National Party's finance spokesperson, Amy Adams, says there are already strong regulations around monopoly infrastructure, and the government could be putting much-needed investment at risk for the sake of ideology.
If you take something like roading or broadband, if the choice for New Zealand is wait for a New Zealand company to want to come along and fund it, or take some foreign investment with careful controls and regulatory oversight as to how it's operated, I think most New Zealanders would say just build the infrastructure.
Ms Adams says the government's rules will deter foreign investment. Consultation on the proposed reforms closes on May the 29th. Atu I te whare paremata mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko John Gerritsen aho.
As the Red Cross appeals for help in finding the New Zealand nurse Louisa Akuve, one of the many places she could be is the El Hol refugee camp, where thousands of Islamic fighters and their families are now being held. Among them are hundreds of foreign nationals. Sydney grandmother Karen Nettleton went to the camp in the northeast of Syria in a bid to bring back her 3 surviving grandchildren. Now, the problem is their father was Australia's most notorious jihadist, Khalid Sharoof. The ABC's Alexandra Beach has their story.
Where's your sisters? Where?
Reunited at last, Karen Nettleton hugged her grandchildren to her chest and cried. She's vowing she will bring them home, but it won't be easy.
Comes as a little boy, 8. His main worry is his friends. And Hudair is the quiet one. She's the real soft one. Just because their last name is Sharoof doesn't mean they're monsters.
Their father, Khalid Sharoof, left Australia to join Islamic State in 2013. A few months later, his wife Tara Nettleton followed him to Syria with their children. Sharoof was notorious, once publishing a photo of one of his sons holding up a severed head. That boy, another son, and Sharoof all died in an airstrike. The mother died from health complications. Their 3 surviving children and 2 grandchildren are in a refugee camp in northeast Syria. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, has previously made it clear he won't be sending Australian officials into Syria to help them.
Now, I'm not going to put any Australian at risk to try and extract people from those situations.
Karen Nettleton's lawyer, Robert Van Alst, says officials have told them that Australian consular staff will be able to help them if they can make it to Turkey.
It's kind of a one-sided conversation. We give information and they just give assurances that things are happening behind the scenes, but don't tell us what.
They would also need to complete identity paperwork and DNA tests to prove they're all entitled to Australian citizenship. But Mr Van Alst says the children are orphans and the government should be doing more to help.
I think it's in the too hard basket for the government, to be honest. They're in an election year. It's difficult to get sympathy.
Donald Rothwell is a professor of international law at the Australian National University. He agrees the major parties won't want to spend much time in an election talking about helping the family of a terrorist. But he says the government's legal obligation here is pretty black and white.
To provide assistance and support for Australian children overseas, and to importantly not discriminate against those children on the basis of any beliefs or activities that their parents may have engaged in.
In a statement, a spokeswoman for the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade says it's a complex and fluid situation, but they are continuing to discuss options with Ms Nettleton.
Alexandra Beach reporting there. It is about 9 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Get in touch with us. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. We'd love to hear your thoughts on anything that you've heard on the program this evening. A South Island mayor is questioning why ratepayers and taxpayers are footing the bill to clean up industrial waste. Stock effluent disposal sites are used to keep animal waste off New Zealand roads and prevent it from seeping into the environment. But local authorities and the Transport Agency are responsible for covering the cost, not industry. Tess Brunton finds out why.
Central Otago District Mayor Tim Cadogan says most people are unaware they're paying to keep industrial waste off our roads.
The real question is, why are ratepayers or taxpayers anywhere paying for these things to be built? And the last one that we got built here was $840,000. That's yet to be commissioned. They're dotted all over the countryside and they're there to collect the industrial waste of the dairy farmers at the taxpayers' cost.
By 2015, there were more than 30 stock effluent disposal facilities across the country, with about 18 either in the works or being considered. Mr Cadogan says rates and taxes are being used to pay to build and maintain these sites. The Otago Regional Council confirmed about a quarter of its proposed $840,000 site will be paid for by its ratepayers, with funding from the Transport Agency covering the rest.
Central Otago has a very small dairy industry, but because we're geographically in the middle, a lot of trucks going from Southland to Westland or vice versa pass through and need to empty. So our ratepayers, through their ORC rates, are getting charged directly for the emptying of industrial waste from other parts of the lower South Island.
In the North Island, Waikato ratepayers contribute up to $15,000 a year to maintain 4 of the region's sites, and there are plans to build 2 new sites in the future. Southland Regional Council ratepayers forked out more than $12,000 last year to pay for the maintenance of the region's only site at 5 Rivers. The remainder of the $26,900 cost was paid for by the Transport Agency. The stock effluent management plans are regionally organised and catching spillage culprits can be difficult. Road Transport Association New Zealand Chief Executive Dennis Robertson says road user charges, not ratepayers, pay for building disposal sites through the Transport Agency's National Road Transport Fund.
The maintenance of those sites is conducted by the local councils, mainly through the regional councils, and they have a responsibility to have an environmental component, and everybody pays for that. Farmers pay rates, truck drivers pay rates, so that's just the way it is. It would be very, very difficult just to bill individuals for that, and probably very costly to do so.
Mr Robertson says the country needs more effluent disposal sites.
The only cost to the ratepayer is that these sites, because all the effluent goes into holding tanks, they actually have to be pumped out and then they have to be put through the normal sewage system that local councils run.
He says this prevents waste hitting the road, minimising the road's safety and environmental impacts. Transport Agency South Island Director of Regional Relationships, Jim Harland, says using rates and charges is not an ideal situation, but it keeps effluent off the highway.
We're promoting ourselves as 100% pure, and obviously effluent on roads and falling off trucks doesn't really fit that image. There's also a road safety component where effluent on the road is very slippery. It's a hazard to motorists. So for both those reasons, it's important that the effluent is disposed of in an appropriate manner.
Stock truck drivers don't have to use the disposal sites, but Mr Harlan says the alternative is much worse for motorists.
We fund them on the basis under a principle of exacerbator should pay, and the exacerbator in this case is the original owner of the stock who benefits from the sale of that stock once it's processed. But there is no cost-effective method for levying that sort of pollution effect.
Jim Harlan says using local rates is an easier and fairer method to cover costs, which are also assisted by road user charges and petrol taxes. And until a better solution is found, the public is picking up the cost to keep New Zealand's roads clean. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
The American actress Lori Loughlin has pleaded not guilty to money laundering charges in relation to a college cheating scam. The star of the TV show Full House and her husband are accused of paying a $500,000 bribe to secure their daughter's entry into a prestigious California university. They're among 33 parents accused of being involved in a scheme to cheat admissions tests and fabricate athletic achievements to get into the top colleges. Some believe the scandal highlights larger issues in the college system. With more, here's our US correspondent, William Denslow.
This month, the architect of this college admissions scandal pleaded guilty in federal court. William Singer is accused of taking around $25 million over a 7-year period to bribe college coaches and admission testing officials. Of the 33 parents accused in the scandal are actresses Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman. Huffman is among 13 parents that indicated they would enter a guilty plea. Loughlin and her husband are accused of paying $500,000 in bribes and will plead not guilty according to court documents. KJ Burkhauser, a student at New York University, says she's pleased to see these parents prosecuted.
I think it's very appropriate that people should be punished for basically breaking the law.
At least 8 elite universities were impacted in this admissions scandal, and a total of 50 people have been charged. Senior counsellor at Admissions Masters Richard Kim says wealth has always played a role in the admissions process, but adds this scandal has been a disappointment to witness.
Outright bribing, counselors and proctors and coaches to get them into these schools, it's very disheartening, right? Because there are students who are trying to do this in a fair way and working so hard to get where they want to be.
Many in the US are now calling for greater transparency in the admissions process. But graduate student at New York University Mark Gowdy says personal donations to colleges bring benefits too.
It's not ideal, but if that donation would allow let's say a few dozen students to attend with, financial bursaries or aid or something like that, then I'm not necessarily sure that I'd be entirely against that.
Confidence in the US college admissions process has been shaken, and addressing wider questions over inequality in the system may prove the real test, even after these legal proceedings are over. William Denslow, New York.
Time for some of your feedback now on our earlier interview. That was with the chair of the Waikato DHB, Sally Webb. The Health Minister this afternoon, David Clark, has revealed that he's considering replacing the board with a commissioner. He's concerned about their financial position, increasing debt projections blowing out to over $56 million, and instability in governance are some of the issues he has cited. We spoke to Sally Webb. She says that it's her personal view that a commissioner is the best way forward. She's the board chair. This in from Annabelle. Waikato DHB has doubled its deficit in the space of the year, coinciding with a time of highly questionable practices, says Annabelle. Did the board members receive a pay increase for the past financial year? This person says Sally sounds utterly incompetent and defensive. It's no wonder there is no interest from good CEOs to report to her. Spiralling debt, no ability to take public ownership of issues. She needs to go. They've got an interim CEO there who goes at the end of the month, and Sally Webb told us they have suspended the job search to replace that person. On the other hand, though, this person has texted in saying good on Waikato DHB chair for actually fronting up for an interview. Very difficult position, and hats off to her. But other side of the coin, Sally is clearly the tip of dysfunction, says this listener, but I'm not going to discuss that in public. We have also had a lengthy email from Dave McPherson, who is one of the board members of the Waikato DHB. He says a number of the DHBs are facing financial pressure. Waikato is no different, and he says at least it's being honest to the minister about the difficulty, unlike the last board, which hid its deficit from the government. He goes on to say that the dissension that the board chair Sally Webb talks about has arisen directly from the public fuss caused by DHB leadership over the decision to try and overturn the coroner's findings from the inquest into his son's death. His son is Nicky Stevens, who committed suicide while under the care of the DHB. And we'll have more on that story actually after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātawa tēnei. The chair of Waikato District Health Board says a commissioner is needed at the DHB. The health minister has told the board he's seriously dissatisfied with its performance and is considering replacing them with a commissioner. David Clark says he's given the board 2 weeks to formally respond before a final decision. The board chair Sally Webb has told Checkpoint that she's talked to Dr Clark over the past couple of months about appointing a commissioner.
I've talked to the board about to the minister about the advantages of having a commissioner, yes. And personally, I believe the appointment of a commissioner is the right move to ensure that Waikato District Health Board has the trusted, focused leadership it needs to address the challenges it faces.
Sally Webb says the board's been unable to sufficiently address matters, including the appointment of a new chief executive. The head of the International Muslim Association of New Zealand says it's time for the government to ban the sale of Nazi memorabilia outside of museums and war collections. Concerns about such items have been raised following the Christchurch terror attacks last month. But Barry White, who owns trash converters in the small town of Palmerston, is unrepentant about selling such memorabilia, saying the attacks had nothing to do with Germany or Nazism, and if such items aren't sold, people will forget their history. The International Muslim Association of New Zealand President Tahir Nawaz says he thinks the government should follow the lead of other countries, such as Germany and France, and ban their sale.
If there's something that we know definitely is going to be used either in a museum or in a collection, then it's a different story. But it shouldn't be open to sell for any shop, but like a $2 shop or a recycle shop or any shop. There shouldn't be anything like that to be allowed.
Tahir Nawaz. The Foreign Affairs Minister says the government knows more about the disappearance and possible whereabouts of New Zealander Louisa Arkavi than the Red Cross. Ms Arkavi, an International Red Cross nurse, and 2 of her colleagues were abducted by ISIS forces in Syria in 2013. But news of it was only released yesterday by the ICRC. Winston Peters says he believes the government has a better grasp of the situation in the ICRC, which works in the region, because it can tap into the expertise of our international allies. Mr Peters says the government still believes the publicity now surrounding Louisa Arkavi is not in her best interests. An Australian grandmother has been reunited with her grandchildren in a refugee camp in northeast Syria after a 3-year campaign to reach them. The children's parents took them to Syria to join the Islamic State group in 2014. Their father was Australia's most notorious jihadist, Khalid Sharoof, who once posted a photo of his young son holding a severed head on social media. Here's the BBC's Phil Mercer.
From her home in suburban Sydney, Karen Nettleton has for years tried to free her grandchildren from their nightmare in Syria. They were orphaned in the conflict and are living in a refugee camp after fleeing Baghouz, the Islamic State's final stronghold. 17-year-old Zainab has 2 children of her own and is expecting another. 2 of her brothers and her father were killed in an airstrike. Her mother is also dead. Australian authorities have told Karen Nettleton her grandchildren will soon be released into her care.
Phil Mercer reporting. Critics are worried a national interest test will scare off foreign investors. The government has proposed the test as part of a second round of changes to the Overseas Investment Act. Our political reporter John Gerritsen reports.
The Associate Finance Minister David Parker says the test could be used to protect strategic assets like airports and power lines companies from foreign ownership. But the National Party's finance spokesperson Amy Adams says the government is effectively telling investors that New Zealand is closed for business. Business New Zealand says the laws that govern how businesses operate are the same regardless of who owns them, and infrastructure companies like airports don't need to be protected from foreign ownership. It warns that uncertainty about the rules could have a chilling effect on foreign investment. Ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Technology company Refugee Xerox New Zealand has been reinstated as a government contractor after being suspended for more than a year. The suspension in late 2017 followed allegations of accounting irregularities that uncovered $500 million in losses at Refugee Xerox New Zealand and its Australian partner. The company remains under the investigation by the Serious Fraud Office. An Otago mayor is questioning why taxpayers and ratepayers are footing the bill to get rid of industrial waste from stock trucks. Most effluent disposal sites are funded by the Transport Agency through road user charges, territorial authorities and regional councils. There are more than 30 sites around the country, including one proposed by Otago Regional Council near Alexandra, costing about $840,000. However, Central Otago District Mayor Tim Cadogan says it isn't fair that taxpayers and ratepayers pay for something that should be borne from the industries involved.
To me, it comes down to an absolute inequity. I cannot think of any other industrial waste that the taxpayer and or the ratepayer are paying for the disposal of at no cost, other than there is some road user charges, obviously, but any truck pays that. So virtually no cost to the producer of that industrial waste.
Tim Cadogan. It's just past 6:05. Veteran Wallabies halfback Nick Phipps has praised Australian rugby bosses for acting quickly in the Israel-Folau furor, admitting it's been a distraction at a crucial time of the Super Rugby season. The Wallabies and Waratahs fullback Folau has been stood down and faces the sack over his controversial anti-gay social media posts last week. The Waratahs are preparing for a match against the Australian conference-leading Melbourne Rebels on Saturday that could define their Super Rugby season. Folau has been given until tomorrow afternoon to either seek a hearing for his breach of the players' code of conduct or have his 4-year, $4 million contract terminated. Arsenal have boosted their hopes of a top 4 finish in English football's Premier League with a 1-0 win over Watford. The result lifted the Gunners 2 places up to 4th on 66 points from 33 games, ahead of 5th placed Chelsea on goal difference and 2 in front of 6th placed Manchester United. The Boston Marathon has ended with a sprint to the finish as Kenya's Lawrence Cherono edged out 2-time winner Ethiopia's Leilisa Dacia by 2 seconds in one of the closest finishes in the event's history. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Melody Thomas is sex positive in the final episode of her current series of Bang. We have a window on the world of relationships in India, where loving someone from a different faith or caste can cost you your life. And this week's after-dinner speaker, our mainly Marxist historian Brian Roper, looks at efforts to combat racism with song on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, isolated showers. Auckland through to North Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo and Taumaranui. Fine weather. South Taranaki and Taihape through to Kapiti, partly cloudy. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mostly cloudy. Occasional showers mainly about the coast, gradually clearing from the south tomorrow. For Wellington, expect showers retreating to the eastern hills, then clearing tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, mainly fine. Areas of cloud or fog morning and evening, and isolated showers about Golden Bay and Buller. For Canterbury and Otago, fine inland apart from areas of cloud or fog morning and evening. Cloudy periods near the coast with isolated showers clearing. Fiordland and Southland, mostly fine. Areas of morning and evening cloud or fog and drizzle about the fjords tomorrow. Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. It's 6:08. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The French President Emmanuel Macron has vowed to rebuild Paris's famed Notre-Dame Cathedral after fire swept through the 850-year-old medieval church. Thousands of Parisians watched on in horror as the blaze gutted the cathedral's roof, toppling its spire. However, the building's structure remains intact and many of its prized artefacts have been saved. The BBC's Ramzan Kumali has this report on the challenges ahead in restoring it to its former glory.
As the flames begin to subside, Parisians may be daunted by the huge task of restoring this much-loved monument. For over 850 years, this Gothic structure has stood in the French capital, but not unscathed.
France has no other cathedral like Notre-Dame.
Notre-Dame has witnessed some of the biggest moments in history. It survived wars, a revolution, the Pope even crowned Napoleon emperor here. But it's also been neglected and rebuilt and attacked and damaged many times in the past, and yet survived. It's a cathedral built to impress. Imposing stonework, stunning stained glass windows. Many of the 30,000 daily visitors may have climbed the 387 steps of the imposing towers. Both survived. But the 96 metres tall spire, itself restored in the 19th century, did not. Restoring this building will be a painstaking task and will be dependent on a small number of highly skilled workers. But Notre-Dame isn't just an important architectural building and religious centre. It means so much more to people from the world of music.
This is our building, worldwide. So those of us who are in the field of music are heartbroken. This has to do as well with those of us who are organists, because since the 15th century there have been great organs in the cathedral.
To get it back to its former medieval glory will undoubtedly cost millions. President Macron has called on the world to help contribute. One of France's wealthiest businessmen, François-Henri Pinault, has already pledged $113 million to the restoration. A hopeful start to bringing this iconic building back to its previous impressive stature.
Ramzan Kumali with that report. And Roderick Fry is a New Zealand furniture maker living in Paris. He witnessed Notre Dame burning from a bridge over the River Seine. He joins me now. Roderick, that must have been pretty, well, I don't know, upsetting watching such a famous, iconic building being damaged in that way.
I mean, we see so many images like it in films, especially the sort of things that my son watches, that it takes a while to actually realise that you're actually seeing reality. We basically knew what was happening, that the fire had started, and with him, with so many things that we've lived through in Paris, we like to actually witness, get out there and actually see history being made and the impacts on people. So we walked down, and coming around the last corner, in the first moment we actually saw it, it was just unbelievable. The whole, at that stage, the spire was still up, but it was engulfed in flames. As we watched, it became redder and redder. My son said it just looked, is it made out of gold? Just everything was golden on the roof at that stage, and then gradually we saw the roof disintegrate and the beams become evident, and just massive gulfs of flame every now and then, just dwarfing everything. It was incredible, but it was very sobering, and being in a crowd of Parisians as well. Little by little, anybody who lived within the area walked down to the river just to watch it.
And what was the reaction? Sorry, Roderick. What was it like being in that group with everybody watching on? What was people's reaction as this was unfolding? It
wasn't the saddest moment that I've lived in France. People were just stunned. I think sobering is the best word. People were just, as long as human beings weren't being killed, as much as we knew, and we all had our fingers crossed for the firemen who were working on the fire. But I think a massive difference was made between any acts of hatred, the sort of things that we've lived through over the last few years, and a building. It's extremely central to France, the structure structure, whether you're Catholic or not. It used to be and I think maybe it still is, the point that all the distances in France are actually measured from Notre-Dame, and you can see it from such a distance. You see it in these very old drawings of the city. It's always been there, and it's quite amazing to see how much it's gone through time, and so to see it damaged just has you probably couldn't probably equal with the Eiffel Tower, but you probably couldn't sense damage or sort of feel the impact of a damage of a bigger icon for the French people.
So, Roderick, I mean, how long did you stand there watching this unfold?
Probably about 2 hours. We just it was just mesmerising. We just watched, and and little by little, people gathered. More and more people gathered around us.
Could you see the firefighters making their way up into the building?
Yeah. Well, we could when we were on the initial bridge, when the spire was still up there, we could see a jet of water coming in from the side onto the burning roof. But it really looked like a tiny trickle. I don't know. Trying to put out a bonfire with a watering can. It just didn't seem to have any effect at all. And then for some reason it stopped. We didn't really know. Were they worried about the spire coming down on the engine, or did they have a temporary evacuation of even the firefighters? I'm not sure. But when it came back, maybe they'd replaced it by a different engine, and they seemed to be getting like 3 or 4 or 5 times more water onto it, and it did seem to be having a bit of an effect at that point. But it's so high, you just can't even hadn't really thought about it. It's I think the area that they were hosing would have been maybe 4 floors higher than the 6th floor buildings at the side. So I don't know what that is, but very, very high. Yeah.
Roderick, at the moment the spire toppled, were you watching that, and what was it like?
Yeah, I think we were all already watching something so apocalyptic that it was just just another moment. There was a sigh of in the crowds. It was very symbolic for a lot of people. But I think by the time we'd watched it for so long, it was clear that it was just not going to be able to stay. The flames were just getting stronger and stronger, and proper flames. It was sort of a glow to start with, and then proper giant flames actually started to come out. So it really looked doomed. It seemed absolutely impossible to do anything about it. So I think we were all a bit. We weren't shocked. There wasn't a moment particular of shock, but there was definitely a sort of a bit of a slap in the face with the iconic the iconic value of the image.
So, Roderick, you're an artisan. You make furniture. The French president has said it's going to be rebuilt. Do you have faith that it will be, and it'll be the same?
Absolutely. Well, in France, they do this amazing job of maintaining these crafts, and I've seen a lot of documentaries of the people who have been progressively repairing different parts of Notre-Dame over the last 20 years, and I know woodworkers who've been through this sort of training program, but they actually have the stonemasons and they have the carpenters, and each year every 2 years there are competitions for people to reach the elite level. So, unlike other countries, there are actually the skills. I mean, there's so many treasured sites in France, so they have to maintain these people who can actually keep them going, and they've always made it very, very clear that they don't want to revert to modern materials in most cases. Although I'm sure when they rebuild Notre-Dame this time, they'll be doing a bit of work on fire protection, better than was done before. But the skill. We were in one of the towers just probably a year ago. We climbed all those steps up to the tower, and the minute detail of these giant beams that just must have been enormous trees, and the way they slot into each other, and massive hunks of wood, but also quite delicate on a giant scale. They're so cleverly put together, which must be murder lifting these things into place without the modern cranes and technology. But just to a millimeter of distance in all the cuts and cross cuts, So the structure was so rigid. It's been there for 900 years or so. Incredible work, but they do have the people to do it, and and definitely with the money that's been pledged this morning by the Pino family, it's a reassuring start. And I'm sure. I think I've visited other places in the world like Samarkand, and if humanity was robbed of such treasures, it'd be absolutely tragic. So I'm very confident it'll come back.
Thank you so much for joining us. That is Roderick Fry, who is a Kiwi furniture maker who lives in Paris now. And as you heard there, he went and watched Notre-Dame burning, basically stood there watching it disintegrating over a period of 2 hours. The Health Minister has told the Waikato DHB board he is seriously dissatisfied with its performance and it could be replaced with a commissioner. David Clark has cited the District Health Board's deteriorating financial position, with last year's deficit of $37 million expected to balloon out to $56 million in the current financial year. He also says he's worried about the instability at a governance and leadership level and ongoing performance issues. Now, David Clark declined to be interviewed, but board member Marianne Gill is on the line with us now. Thanks for joining us this evening, Marianne. How are people reacting to the chair, Sally Webb's comments that she may not be the best person for the job anymore?
I'm sorry, I hadn't heard that. But look, do you know who I'm feeling for tonight? I'm feeling for the 7,500 staff at Waikato DHB who go to work every day and provide outstanding care. That's what I'm feeling for. They didn't ask for any of this, and they've just been getting on with the job, and all power to them.
Well, Sally Webb believes that a commissioner may be the best way forward for the DHB. Do you agree with her position?
I'm not certain that I agree with her position right now, but I'm certainly on record as saying I don't agree with the current DHB system in New Zealand. I think there are too many DHBs. And I think the current mix of elected and appointed board members across the country is not working. And I had thought that when the review by Heather Simpson was commissioned, that the minister might actually delay DHB board elections anyway, pending her review coming out. So, one part of me says the system is broken anyway. The other part of me says it's a real shame that Waikato DHB is the one that's being called out at this point in time.
So do you not think there is any dysfunction within your board, that there is a lack of governance or leadership? Do you think it's just a broader issue?
I think it's a broader issue, yes, because I know...
So you don't take any responsibility for the financial blowout and the concerns that the minister has raised?
Of course we take responsibility. That's what we're elected to do. We take responsibility, and I wouldn't call it a blowout. We've actually called the Ministry of Health in last year, and they've been working alongside us in the DHB to take us through the situation. So no, I would not call it a blowout. I would call it we are trying desperately to provide care for the people of the Waikato DHB region as best we can.
So is that deficit, the projected deficit, is that just the cost of providing quality health care?
Absolutely, that's the cost of providing quality health care to the people of the Waikato DHB. And one of the things we have been doing is addressing the real inequities that exist in our population, particularly among Maori and people in our rural areas. And I think as a board we really had taken the bit between our teeth and we were running with that. We're not the only DHB with deficits,
But you're the only DHB that we know of that the minister is considering sacking in favour of a commissioner. So what's the difference between how you're doing things and how the other boards are operating, other DHBs?
Oh, I think, unfortunately, from our perspective, we've stuck our heads up a bit, really. We've had other issues that have been going on that the minister has been aware of.
So when you say you stuck your head up a bit, what do you mean?
Well, I think that we've had some issues around another board member with around mental health, and that's been well canvassed. Of course, yes, we've got our financial issues, and I note in his letter he talks about some other issues as well. But on the other hand, we've also been getting on with some really, really good stuff in Waikato, and for that I applaud the other board members and the staff.
Why haven't you been able to appoint a chief executive?
Well, I don't know, to be fair, because actually I reckon it's the best job going in health.
Why don't you know?
Well, I don't. We stopped the process, and I don't know why we stopped the process other than we had challenges. But we did have some very high calibre of people apply. And I just applaud those that did apply. Some, as I understand, did withdraw. We weren't privy to why they withdrew. But, I think being Chief Executive of Waikato DHB in the current situation would be a great job for somebody to really make a difference.
Isn't the fact that you don't know why the process has stopped, you don't know why some of the applicants withdrew, doesn't that suggest that there is poor communication within the board?
No, what that suggests is it was an employment matter, and the reasons why people said they withdrew it was not something that they wanted to share with the rest of the board, and that's entirely a matter for those people who withdrew.
So you've got a couple of weeks to respond to the Minister's concerns. What would you like to say to him?
Look, I would like to say that this board has made huge inroads in a number of areas, and I acknowledge each of my colleagues on the board for that. I really want him to look at the system, though. I just don't think 20 DHBs, it's far too many for New Zealand. I think he should be looking at the system and looking at the ways that DHBs are delivering their services. It just needs something happening to the system.
Marianne, I just want to be clear. Can you categorically say there's no division within the board, and that there's no, dysfunction in terms of you all operating together as a board? Each member of the board I've had a great time working with. I think they've all brought their individual skills. There have been some times when we've disagreed about things, but by and large we've been a very good board to work with. Appreciate your time this evening. That's Marianne Gill, who is a board member of the Waikato DHB board, which, as you heard earlier, the Minister is considering sacking them, in essence, and bringing in a commissioner. Let's return now to Paris and the fate of the fire-ravaged Notre-Dame Cathedral. CNN correspondent Jim Bitterman is on the line now. Jim, tell me, what does it look like now, the cathedral?
Well, Lisa, the flames have been extinguished. There's still hot pockets, according to the fire officials who've been able to get inside now. And in fact, they declared it under control at about 3:30 this morning local time. It's now about 8:30, so about 5 hours ago. In any case, what started this morning is that there are experts going through the building that are going to see exactly how damaged the infrastructure of the cathedral is. In fact, the roof collapsed according to some estimates, about 2/3 of the roof collapsed, and maybe even more than that. That was basically damaged. This roof was supported by what they called the forest, which was 1,300 oak trees were felled when the original construction back in the 12th century, when they were originally building the roof of Notre Dame. And in fact, 1,300 oak trees were felled, and those oak trees was what went up so furiously in flames last night. So it's basically now a question of assessment of what can be saved and what has been lost, and then also I think with assessment of exactly how this started. They've already started questioning some of the workers who were doing the renovation projects on the roof, and they've been asking exactly what may have been the cause of this fire. That's something that's going to be on the minds of a lot of people. And the prosecutor of Paris has apparently ruled out any kind of criminal intent. He's started an investigation for an accidental start of the fire. So they apparently ruled out any kind of criminal intent. But in any case, it's something that will take a couple of days here, but they're going to be going through it very thoroughly. And then the reconstruction last night, President Macron said very, very seriously and very directly that Notre Dame will be rebuilt. He said it's our destiny to rebuild Notre Dame, and he vowed that it will be rebuilt. But that's a process that architectural folks were saying this morning that could take decades. So it may be a long, long time before Notre Dame is restored to the shape that it was in that we all remember.
Jim, we are seeing now a live picture. We can see the scaffold up from obviously the previous renovation and some of the charring to the building. I'm just wondering, because we could also earlier see the firefighters battling away there. What about fire control? Does the thing have sprinklers or what? Why was it so difficult?
Well, there was not a sprinkler system involved, according to officials, but the rector of the cathedral, in fact, said that every day the oak supporting beams in the attic of the cathedral were inspected by fire officials every single day, because I guess there were concerns about exactly this sort of thing happening. But despite that, this fire, which broke out somewhat after closing time last night, about 10 minutes to 7 p.m. local time last night, apparently took everyone by surprise. And I don't think anyone had an idea that it was going to be this hard to fight. The fire department in Paris has fire boats in the rivers, and of course the river runs right next to Notre-Dame, and they have long ladders and trucks that can extend water up high. But in fact, because of the situation of Notre-Dame, it was very difficult to address exactly the spot where the flames began, which was sort of in the center of the roof. So, no, it was a tough fight for the firemen. There was one fireman badly injured, but everybody in Paris, every fireman in Paris, was basically committed to this last night. Every single firehouse was involved. 400 firemen that were involved fighting this fire. So they tried their best, but the fact is that a good deal of the cathedral has now been lost.
And how have Parisians been reacting to it?
Well, this is everyone, I think, feels a very personal connection to this. I've lived here 40 years, and when I first came here, the first 7 years I was here, I lived across the street from the back gardens of Notre-Dame, and that was my local parish. And in fact, my daughter was baptized in the center of the cathedral. So I feel a very close connection to it. But also, I think that anybody who ever visited this, and that includes the 13 million or so tourists that come to it every year.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The chair of Waikato DHB has told Checkpoint she believes a commissioner should be appointed to ensure the board has the leadership needed to address its challenges. The High Court has refused to compel the government inquiry into Operation Burnham to release information to lawyers representing Afghan villagers. People in France are already pledging money to rebuild Notre-Dame Cathedral after it was ravaged by fire. And Wellington commuters could be delayed up to 40 minutes due to mechanical checks on some Metlink trains. Buses are on standby. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather will be at 7 o'clock.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
So this has all been very much driven, Karen, by the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Lately with me, Karen Hayes, your late night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
So you should be able to sit at home in your pyjamas and sue someone, basically.
Live.